This is the Reimagine Richmond Podcast, imagining our power to transform our visions. We know the system is broken, but we are not. We keep each other safe. In this series, community members will share their stories of safety and how they reimagine Richmond.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Carmen Martinez, La Super Poderosa community organizer with Reimagine Richmond. Today, we have our co-host, Brandy Joseph, and our special guest, Pedie Perez's father, Rick Perez.
Thank you for joining us, Rick. First question, tell me a little bit about your son.
My son was like most kids. Sometimes I had issues with him. Most of the time, though, he was a good kid. I had to ride his butt a little bit at times, but in the end, though, it was he ended up being a very good kid, a very good child, I should say. A kid is a baby goat. A very good child. One of the things that was really upsetting to me was he was just starting to be mature and responsible when this happened. So,
thank you for sharing a little bit about how Pedie Perez was. Can you please talk more about what happened to Pedie on September 14th as Uncle Sam's liquor?
He was. He hung out in that neighborhood. He had friends that were like 2 or 3 blocks down the road that actually lived there, and my son would at times stay in my camping trailer at our yard just so he could be in the neighborhood. He very much loved being down there. Everybody to this day knows who he was. He was part of the community, and it kind of like stands out in my mind. The only one that didn't know who he was the officer that murdered him, and it's unreal how the police department is prides themselves on community policing, and had it really been community, they would have known who he was, because he was very much known in the community. To this day, like I said, he's part of the community. So I just I could go on about how the police mishandled this, and nothing to bring my son back, but hopefully this kind of a podcast will prevent this happening again to anyone else. So,
What does justice look like to you?
I don't see it. It doesn't exist when you're dealing with police. The police are the ones who they capture the narrative, and whether it's false or not, and the public is very prejudiced. They believe what the police say. They being prejudiced is prejudging, and they don't believe anything else because like we should, we look up to the police. We look up to the police to be law-abiding and outstanding citizens, but that wasn't the case with the cop that murdered my son. It was known that he was issue. He was sent back to the academy 3 different times. He was recommended for non-hire. I actually found this out from a officer that was in charge of that department, but he doesn't want to come on saying that in public, and I understand why, because he's looking out for his retirement, and then that, just like any gang, the Blue Brotherhood is nothing more than a gang, and they put pressure on their fellow members. And I don't like talking about them. It doesn't do me any justice that way. I wish that they handled things in a more professional manner that we all expect.
So the Richmond Citizens Police Review Commission at the time, which is now known as the Richmond Community Police Review Commission, voted 7-1 to sustain a complaint that was excessive and unreasonable force that was used against your son. The question I'm asking you is, do you believe this vote should have taken place in an open session so all people in the public would have heard about it?
I really don't have an opinion on that. I'm grateful for the almost unanimous decision. And actually the person who was the dissenting vote, I know who it was. It was easily to the process of deduction to find out. And that person was new to the commission at the time. And so I still interact with them, and it's back to that a prejudice of thinking the police never do anything wrong, and the police are only human, and which they remind me of quite often, and this mistake resulted in the murder of my son, and like I say, nothing's going to bring my son back in this world, but preventing it from happening again is one of my goals. And actually, I do resent the fact that the police are not held accountable for making a bad decision, making things that, I do acknowledge the fact that they do have a tough job at times. There's people that push them to their limits, but they tend to treat everybody in the same way, the same, they apply the same template to everybody, and and this is the results we get when we get an officer that actually took matters into his own hands. And again, I'm grateful for the decision that the Community Police Review Commission made. I just want everyone around to be aware of it.
Yeah, so following that, how did you find out about the CPRC's investigation into Pedie's death?
Well, first off, we had a very difficult time getting the investigation to happen. At the time, the rules were, I believe, 20 days or something of that nature. And we did not even know the Police Review Commission even existed. And then, obviously, when you're in the trauma of losing the most cherished thing in the world, you're not thinking that way.
Right.
You're thinking, this isn't right. There's things need to be dealt with professionally and stuff. And so you're not on that page. Right. And so we found out about it later, and actually I think our complaint was 145 days late, or 145 days from when it happened, and you were supposed to do it within 20 days. We're extremely grateful that the City Council were able to push it through. No help from the mayor at the time, but we actually had a bunch of support from the Richmond Progressive Alliance, which we're grateful for. And so we were able to get an investigation, And actually now that that happened to us in that way, it's automatic
Right.
that anyone shot by police is investigated, and I tend to toot our horn on that one, that we were able to get that to happen, because that's the way it should be.
Correct.
And so we have Senate Bill 1506, I believe it is, that Rob Bonta, the current Attorney General, automatically investigates any unarmed citizens killing. And so not only in Richmond is it happening, it's happening statewide. Not that we're getting any results from that. Rob Bonta tends to be more politically inclined and not, for whatever reason, they like to have that Police Officers Association endorsements. And actually that's one of my next pet peeves, is to eliminate that.
So, question, do you think the CPRC should notify family members of people involved in police officer shootings when the investigations take place?
Anything would help, any family member. And yes, we were grateful to find out about the Police Review Commission. We were grateful to actually get the investigation. And so, yes, we, again, like I say, thank God that you guys don't have to think about it from my point of view. But if you was in my shoes, you would be grateful that you have someone to look out for your best interests, or even the city's best interests.
Right.
It's again, I think it's something that should not have happened, and I think there's a lot of people behind me that feel the same way.
So, in a quote in the Richmond Confidential, it stated, and I quote, "Smith and Perez argue that beyond the administrative challenges, the effectiveness of the CPRC is hampered by legislation, including the Public Safety Officers Procedural Bill of Rights. They say that these statutes are misused by the police that do not have criminal intent. How do officers misuse legislation such as a bill to avoid accountability?"
First off, I'm unsure who Smith is. Maybe that could be clarified, but the Police Officers Bill of Rights was meant to protect them from any malicious things that could occur from people trying to find out information. But I'm not that way, and there's a lot of people that are not that way. But back to the Police Officers Bill of Rights, they tend to use it to hide things. And we was able to get Senate Bill 1421 passed, which allowed the public to find out information about cops that before you could never find out. Every complaint about a cop was the first complaint, because the public was not allowed to know anything about a cop. But now we are able to do that. And one of the problems that I have with the city of Richmond, or at least the Police Officers Association, is they were the ones fighting against it, like, very adamantly. And our case, my son's case, was the first one to be held in the city of Martinez, and the city of Richmond's Police Officers Association was the main opponent of it. And I did not like hearing that, but I'm happy to say that my son's case was the first one heard, and how we were able to get that law passed. Because I talk to a lot of police officers. I'm grateful that I'm able to communicate with a lot of people. And a lot of them talk to me after they hear my story. At first they're guarded against it because they want to protect the Blue Brotherhood. But later on they start talking to me and they say, yeah, I've witnessed outright criminal acts that police do on the job. And they don't want me to say who they are and what the situation was. But just to hear them say that, they know that there's an issue, there's a problem. Some of the guys are they don't deal with things professionally. The city of Richmond, prior to our situation, had the Richmond Cowboys, and obviously that's happening all over the place. You have Oakland that has the Oakland Riders. You have look what's going on in Antioch this present day, with the police just acting unprofessional. And I understand they're human and they make mistakes, but we do hold them to a higher standard. And for them to hide behind the police officer's Bill of Rights is horrible. And that's one of the things that really annoyed me with the head of the Police Officers Association in Richmond, is he said that they come to expect that this information is protected, and they had a real big issue with this law being retroactive. Which what are they trying to hide? Is my point. They if they're obeying the law and doing what was right, and there's a lot of times they have to push some of those. Pull the trigger, I should say, but there's many times that it's unnecessary. My son was unarmed. The officer frisked him, knew he was unarmed, and then one of the things I'm grateful for from the police officers, from the Community Police Review Commission's investigation, was that they found that the officer actually shot him on the ground before he got up, which the police don't tell you that part. And one of the other things was how they released the video that was heavily edited, and it showed, it favored them in the process where it wasn't accurate. Many of the members of the Richmond Progressive Alliance and City Council said, "Oh, this is not accurate. You need to take that thing down now," which they did. So we don't need a police department that is trying to deceive the public. We need a police department that is fighting criminals, not people that are intoxicated on the street. They walk away from a lot of those issues a lot of times, but for whatever reason, this one officer felt it was necessary to murder my son. And, all right, I talk too much.
Thank you for sharing. I know you mentioned a couple of bills, so as a follow-up question, we know that you have been incredibly active in your fight for justice for Pedie, and you lobby for so many bills, and we want to mention a few. You mentioned Senate Bill 1421, the Right to Know Act, and Assembly Bill 392, which redefines California's legal use of force and how it is evaluated. Most currently, you have advocated for the SB 2, also known as the Kenneth Ross Jr. Decertification Act, which helps eliminate police officers involved in shootings from being hired into other police departments and doing the same harm in other communities by taking away the police officer's badge as a decertification. Right now, Gavin Newsom is using AB 134 to weaken the language and make police accountability harder. How do you think this might impact the community?
Gavin Newsom is playing politics with our loved ones' lives. I do not appreciate that. He would be acting very much the same way I am if anything happened to any of his family members. Anybody would be, you, any cop, anything. I'm sure there's some situations where that law gets abused just like anything else, but when you have a member of your family killed by the police, whether you want to call it murder or just unfortunate situation, information is necessary for closure, and there's a lot of situations where the police have to use force, and everybody knows, God knows, there's many criminals out there, and just like anything in life, the bad people ruin it for the good people. But there's no need for us to have bad police trying to hide behind any Information Act or anything like that. The facts are the facts, and they do eventually come out. Like with Pedie's case, it did come out that the officer shot him. The trajectory of the bullets was he was still on the ground, and but unfortunately, many people in the community think that the police are doing a super hard job and they're justified in anything they do, but there's a lot of situations where that would be a true statement, but not every situation is the same. So, and that's the issue I have with the police, is they want to treat every situation like you're a hardcore criminal. Not everybody is. There's people that are criminals, and there's people that are breaking the law. And yes, the police need to deal with them, but pulling that trigger is very much a last resort, and once they pull that trigger, it's forever. So I talk to a lot of cops these days about that, and actually people who are either acquaintances or family members and stuff. I tell them, just if you ever have to pull the trigger, just make sure you're right. And obviously, they're going to have to protect their own life first, and I understand that. But who wouldn't? But in this situation, when the officer knew that my son was unarmed, it was just wrong. And one of the issues I have with the police are I'm sure you guys are familiar with that Marine statement that says, never leave any fallen warrior behind, ever. They act like a cop that's caught up in a legal situation like this is a fallen warrior. Not all of them are. Some of them are, not all of them. And so they protect them much the same way. And this, like I'm watching the Antioch legal proceedings going on just 2 days ago. I seen it in the news, and that lawyer that's protecting them, he seems to get around. He seems to have he fabricated. He's the same one that dealt with my son. They fabricate these stories about, like they said, my son tried to grab the officer's weapon. There was 6 cell phone videos, and the police confiscated all the phones. We was able to get one of the phones back, But guess what? The memory chip was missing. This is games they play, and what are they trying to hide? And why, when they showed that video I mentioned earlier, why'd they try to edit it to make it look like they did nothing wrong? Again, I'm grateful the community called it out immediately, and they immediately took it down. It was a fabricated story, and again, it don't bring my son back, but them lying about it is demonizing my son, and that's not the truth. I fully acknowledge my son could have handled the situation differently, but he's not the one that had the weapon. He's not the one that pulled the trigger. He's not the one that threatened anyone's life. And he was not threatening anyone's safety or anything at the time. The story that they fabricated about what happened is so riddled with lies. Why, how can anyone trust them anymore?
Most currently, you have advocated for SB 2, also known as the Kenneth Ross Jr. Decertification Act, which helps eliminate police officers involved in shootings from being hired into other police departments and doing the same harm in another community by taking away a police officer's badge, also known as a decertification. Right now, Gavin Newsom is using AB 134 to weaken the language and make police accountability harder. How do you think this might impact the community?
Great.
Can I add on to that? The disqualification of bad officers bill. I work with Oscar Grant's uncle, Uncle Bobby, and he's very instrumental in making a lot of these situations occur. And anyway, the social media is a great thing for all of us families that are able to connect with each other. And we found out several times over, like one of the cases was a cop from South San Francisco murdered this kid, Derek Gaines. And then he transferred to San Francisco, shot someone else there. I think that shooting was more justified because the guy was not exactly an outstanding citizen. But then again, if you applied the law correctly, it probably would have, shouldn't have happened. Okay, but anyway, this officer ended up transferring to Antioch. And then these chiefs from these other cities, they just look at them as, good old brothers in blue, and they hire them up. And that law has been passed now, so now we have a way of making sure stuff like that doesn't occur again.
Okay, so for me, are there ways that community members can get involved? It's also with families that have been impacted by police violence, can hold police accountable. For example, you got Family United for Justice, which was created by Oscar Grant's uncle, Uncle Bobby X, created the Love Not Blood campaign. Are there other ways community members can be involved in changing the system?
A lot of times that I see was, I don't necessarily fault these people for it, but a lot of people are, again, I keep using that word, prejudice. They prejudge a situation that shows that they always err on the side of the police. And the community should look at it more with an open mind, like, the police are just like anyone else.
So you're asking the community to ask questions
Yeah, or not necessarily believe everything the police say immediately, because they are trying to protect their image, and that's understandable, but that doesn't make everyone a criminal automatically just because the police did something. It makes the police are just like anyone else; they make mistakes as well, and one of the things that all of us victims of police murders have in common is we all have stories that the police say one thing and the facts show another, and it's right now that word the RICO Act and all that stuff is going out. It's a conspiracy that the police use against the people to show that they do no wrong. And they got it. It's actually taught to them by Lexapol, how to interrogate families, to get information from them about, like one of the questions they asked me was, does your son do drugs? And my answer was, well, he's a young man, he's experimented, but no, he's not a drug addict. And actually they didn't find any drugs in his system whatsoever other than alcohol, which is a drug, but they tried to say like he was on meth and all that stuff, which a lot of people are, but my son wasn't. He actually despised that stuff. Again, my point is that these police are taught to deal with this stuff in this way and to protect themselves, which is not. It's unprofessional to do that like that. It's like the truth is the truth.
So the community should always keep an open ear and don't always hear what they believe what they hear every time.
The police are notorious for putting out information that is not accurate, that favors them, and I understand that the community needs police, and several of the older folks and stuff are terrified of the crime that's on the streets and stuff, so they want the police, but that still doesn't make them right. It does not make them right, and it does not make me wrong. So it's the community, I wish, would look at things with an open mind, and the police try to always protect their image first, which leads to this false narrative quite often. And I'm sure there's plenty of times where it's factual, but there's times when it's not. So.
So as we come to an end of our podcast, I do want to ask, if you can say anything to the community of Richmond, what would you say?
Have an open mind. You can't believe everything that the police tell you. They are only human, and they're just as scared as anyone else of making a mistake. So I like to look up to the police officers. I was raised to do that. Every one of us, though, was maybe not you youngsters, but Randy's probably familiar with how everyone had bumper stickers on their car that said "Question Authority," and maybe that was the wrong thing to teach my son, because he questioned authority and he got murdered. So you don't see that sticker on cars as much as you used to, but one of the facts is my son, like I said, was frisked. he was asked to sit on the curb, and when my son complied with the cop after he was frisked, he called 911 on his cell phone on the cop. The cop, the 911 could hear that the cop was in the background, so they said, "There's already an officer there," and they hung up on him. 26 seconds later, the shot spotter goes off. What happened in those 26 seconds that I understand is after the 911 hung up on my son, he asked the officer, "Am I being arrested?" And the officer said, "No, you're being detained." So my son, being intoxicated the way he was, said, "F this," and got up and started walking. That's when the officer went after him from behind, knocked him to the ground, actually had him in a George Floyd kind of scenario where his knee was in his back, and my son was able to flip around, and that's when the cop backed up and shot him on the ground. So the police would have you, they actually said that my son approached him trying to take his weapon. How do you do that when you're stumbling on the ground? And then all the witnesses all had their statements were all the same. The only statement that was different was the police statement. But that's the only one that floats in the community because the public wants to believe what a cop tells them, and the cops ain't always truthful. So
thanks for tuning into Reimagine Richmond Podcast. A special thanks to all the community members who made this podcast possible. Reimagine Richmond is a movement pushing the city to invest in life-affirming resources and programs. To join the movement, visit our website at reimaginerichmond.org.